Among Western fans of Silent Hill, there's a lot of discussion about which Silent Hill games are the good ones. And some fans argue that the first four games, those that were made by the original Japanese team Silent, are the only valid ones. I've long argued this point of view is unhelpful, as it tries to make ultimate statements about personal opinions, but it also presents the idea of a singular Team Silent that made the first four games, a concept I've often stood against. Which long led me to wonder who exactly was Team Silent. I've explored how the games were made and some of the people who made them, but there are still plenty of individual artists and creators who helped make this classic series, whose work has gone underappreciated. So today we begin by exploring the works of a woman who was part of what we'll call Team Silent 3 and Team Silent 4, Hiro Usuda. Hiro Usuda, sometimes referred to as Hiroko in game credits, was born in March of 1979. Raised in the rural countryside of Japan, where her father was the fifth generation of her family to live in the old house she grew up in. It was a strict household, as far as entertainment was concerned. No video games or manga were allowed in the house, which only made Hiro-san more interested in them. She was only able to indulge during visits to her friends' houses, and it wouldn't be until adulthood that she could play games on her own. Her hobby growing up was art. She enjoyed examining encyclopedias and picture books that displayed the work of foreign artists. Western art styles were beautiful to her, and she found herself inspired. She wanted to use the bright, vivid colors of Japanese illustrations, the manga she was forbidden to own, and the realist style of Western art to create her own style. As an adult, she entered into vocational school to study illustration at Chiyoda Technical College in 1997. To her frustration, manga was also banned in school. It was what she wanted to draw, but it wasn't allowed in class. Her earliest artwork reflects these restrictions, incredibly realistic in style. It was during this time she first earned money for her art, drawing illustrations for a school pamphlet, and this continued as she drew art for various advertisements and mobile games through her college years. Early in her studies, she became interested in video games. Seeing the art that existed in games at the time, she was inspired by the intricate details and sophisticated illustrations. She applied to both Atlus and Konami while still in school, and in 1998 found out she'd been accepted by Konami. Once she graduated, she'd have a place among their teams. This encouraged Hiro-san to seek out and play her first video game, and she chose a Konami title, Metal Gear Solid. She absolutely loved it. It wasn't the only game she fell for. Record of Lodoss War is another title she played during her student years, and she credits the game with waking her up to the idea of fantasy artwork. It greatly inspired her, and later in life, she'd even get the chance to work on art for a game in the series. Anime and manga were also inspirational to her. Her favorite series is The Rose of Versailles, a classic shoujo title that focuses on French history. She draws a great deal of fan art for it, and examining the art, it's clear it had influence on her own style, the way she highlights the feminine, softer side, and her usage of Western styles of dress from that time period. Sailor Moon, Nadia of the Mysterious Sea, and Yadamon are also named as some of her favorites. In 1999, she joined Konami, straight out of school, at around 20 years old. Her first project was a 3D RPG called Elder Gate, which would release in Japan in June of 2000. This was the very early years of 3D in video games, during a time when the younger generation coming in were learning to use and develop a technology that was still very new. The first 3D Final Fantasy came out in 97, Silent Hill in 99. Hiro-san came into the industry at the perfect time to learn 3D art and animation. For Eldergate, she was involved in using Soft Image 3D to design and model 3D characters and backgrounds, and also worked on illustrations for promotional material. She was also involved in a minor way with Suikoden 3, working on backgrounds that went unpublished according to her resume. She says the project was a mess, and she was happy when she was moved to Silent Hill 3 in January of 2001. Silent Hill 3 is a story heavily focused upon religious imagery and themes, upon darkness and light, the normal world coming into contact with the horrendous world of cults and obsession. Hiro Usuda would be brought onto the project as a 3D artist and background designer, but she would end up having a far greater influence on Silent Hill as a series than perhaps she could have imagined. The first and last levels of Silent Hill 3 are the works of Hiro-san, the shopping center that Heather awakens in, and the church at the end of the game, including the nowhere portion and the final boss confrontation. The open and close of the story are heavily influenced by Hiro-san's work and artistic style, and little references to her personal artwork can be found throughout. Hiro Usuda's art portfolio is often referred to in some form of Tirn-Al, Revolt of Tirn-Al, Tirn-Al Rebellion, or just Tirn-Al. The term comes from Celtic myth and refers to a mythic otherworld of fairy folk and magic that certainly fits the ethereal, soft blend of color and painting style she often uses. Posters of her work are found throughout the shopping center she designed, and the names on the back doors of various stores are references to Western magical terms like Tirn-Al and Yggdrasil. She also worked on visual effects for the game and seems to have had a major influence on the use of lighting. Working with the demo designer, she created a sample of lighting style that showed how to use lighting to reduce the flatness of the characters, positioning the light to reflect in the characters' eyes and give the scene a sense of depth and realism. She wanted contrast and darkness in the background visuals, and those seem to be very clearly present in the cutscenes in the mall section of game. In addition, she painted 11 paintings for the background of Silent Hill 3, the 6 mythic paintings inside the church, the 3 saint paintings in the chapel, the angel painting in the Otherworld church hallway, and the painting behind Claudia before the final boss. All of these works are incredibly powerful, with a heavy religious feeling to them. Hiro-san discusses how she studied Western religious art in order to work on these pictures, especially Caravaggio, an Italian artist known for his dramatic usage of light and shadow, as well as exceedingly violent subjects for his paintings. In addition to the paintings themselves, she created the stained glass windows in the chapel, which have a similarly heavy religious feeling. These images are hugely influential on the series of Silent Hill. They establish features of the cult's beliefs, their myths, and the appearance of their saints, the way they portray their god, and their traditions in art. One record of Hiro-san's work says she was also a writer on Silent Hill 3, and though the mention is vague, it may mean she was involved in writing the myths associated with the 6 paintings she made for the church. In January of 2002, as Silent Hill 3's development drew to a close, Hiro Usuda moved to the Silent Hill 4 team, once again working on 3D background design, this time creating more than 30 different backgrounds. This includes the scenes that are visible from Room 302's windows, every car and every person, every special effect and angle of view, Hiro-san modeled and designed. She was also involved in drawing dozens of pictures, which were used for the main menu and for events. This may mean advertising material and character pictures like these. She also mentions working on monster design modeling for the background, possibly referring to the backdrop monsters who are part of the setting, like the giant worm and the wall creatures. Most impressively, she designed and modeled the spiral staircase, my favorite location in the game. While working on the Silent Hill games, Hiro-san did a great deal of research on abandoned locations in the West, using 2 major websites, Abandoned Places and Ghost Town Gallery, websites focused on photography of the abandoned places of the United States and Europe. Using the Wayback Machine, I examined the resources available during the development time of the games, and found some interesting parallels between some of the images. Silent Hill 4 has a heavily industrial feeling, with many levels inspired by construction and building sites like the images found on these sites. In particular, there are a lot of spiral staircases in the old castles and factories that might have inspired the staircase in 4. The cooked dog, the sewer fairy, the mysterious moth at the bottom of the stairs. So many incredibly unique and memorable moments of Silent Hill 3 and 4 were created thanks to the talent and designs of Hiro Usuda. But while she loved working on Silent Hill, it wasn't Silent Hill that she really dreamed of working on. Since playing Metal Gear Solid for the first time, she knew she wanted to work on the series, and so she approached someone on the Kojima Productions team seeking a chance to interview and move to the Metal Gear projects. She got her chance, and found herself joining the Metal Gear Solid 3 development team in October of 2003. Once again, she was working on 3D background design, this time on the level of Groznygrad, which just so happens to be the level of the game that includes references to Tirnael, posters of Hiro-san's work, and Silent Hill 3 paintings at various locations. At some point during this time, she also drew a singular picture for Castlevania Aria of Sorrow, a game that released in May of 2003. This game over screen, which also appears as a painting in the castle. She also worked on the subsistence upgrade for MGS3, doing character modeling for the online features in January of 2005, and she did some work for Metal Gear Solid 4 until E3 2006. It had been 7 years since she'd joined Konami. She'd worked on 2 of Konami's most famous franchises and had a small hand in 2 others. Unfortunately, the stress of working long corporate hours for multiple years was starting to show. She started putting together an online portfolio of her work, thinking that she might take the chance to go freelance, and it wasn't long before other companies were reaching out with offers. In November of 2006, she made it official and left Konami to become a freelance artist. It was a rough start. After 7 years, she was suffering what we in the West would call burnout. Her online blog makes it clear that stress and overwork had run her ragged, and her art suffered as a result. For the next 2 years, she took some minimal jobs, while working with a health professional to get back on her feet. Her most major project during this time was a series of illustrations for a Japanese MMORPG called Perfect World, the same company that first reached out to her before she left Konami. Over time, Hiro-san ended up drawing more than 100 illustrations for the game, which were used on banner ads, advertisements, posters, and appeared across the internet and in popular internet cafes, even in the rural countryside where her family lived. As the game is an MMO which continues to be updated to today, these ads continued to be used for more than a decade, spreading Hiro-san's work across a broad expanse of online and offline sources over multiple years. At this point in time, Japanese art for video games was heavily anime-influenced with a flat style of coloring and shading. Hiro-san's artwork, her unique style, blends the bright and vivid colors of anime with the 3D shading and realism of Western painting, and it was a look that stood out. Both her client and the president of the company called to praise her work on these ads. By 2008, Hiro-san felt like herself again and felt inspired to push her art more. She would eventually go on to do any and everything in the freelance space. She drew advertisements, flyers for events, CD covers, book covers, trading cards, art for mobile games, magazines, even clothing. She worked for Sega, drawing 200 illustrations for a major mecha game. She worked as an artist, illustrator, and costume designer for Asobimo Games. She drew cards for Broccoli, Upper Deck Japan, Square Enix, and Taito. She would partner with multiple bands to draw for their events and CDs, including Live Moon, Adam Kadmon, and Devil Anthem. Multiple magazines would interview her about her work and her process, and she would lecture on art at events in Tokyo, as well as teach art classes in Taiwan. She appeared at 2 anime conventions in the United States as a special guest, and her art was featured at a major event in Saudi Arabia. And now, as of June 2022, she just finished her first major solo exhibition as an artist. For artists in Japan, appearing at public events is a way to meet fans and fellow artists and sell their work. And it's a major form of publicity and a way to make money, like conventions are in the United States. Before this year, Hiro-san appeared at many events, but this was the first time a studio would feature her work alone. It just finished over the weekend and seems to have been a major success. You can find many photos of her art and the event on Twitter. To commemorate the event, a special doujinshi, or an art magazine of the creator's work, was released. This is the largest collection she's released, and you can purchase it at the link in the description. I believe they ship globally. Hiro Usuda's artistic career is a marvel. Working on such famous, influential titles, only to leave the games industry to strike out on her own, to forge ahead in spite of personal struggles and find such major success. It's an incredible story, and it's clear it couldn't have happened to a more deserving or talented artist. Her artwork is beautiful and unique, and she's capable of adapting to so many different styles that blend realism and anime so well. Today, you can find her on Twitch. She mostly speaks Japanese, but there are subtitles that translate, and you really don't need to know the language to appreciate her art. Thank you, Hiro Usuda-san. Here's to many more successful years of freelance art.